I'm Ethan Caldwell, 34, living in a luxurious Seattle apartment where from my window I can see the city sparkling with lights every night. My life at first glance seems like the perfect American dream last year. I sold my tech startup for $5 million, enough to live comfortably without financial worries. No wife, no kids, just freedom. But if you think my life is a rosy novel, you're mistaken. There's a dark ink stain smearing every beautiful page, and that stain is my father, Robert Caldwell. My father was once a renowned real estate entrepreneur, but after a series of failed deals, he became bitter and controlling not of my life, but of my wallet. To him, I wasn't a son, but a walking ATM. As a child, I endured his baseless beatings nights when he'd come home drunk and take his anger out on me for no reason. Those memories are like scars that never heal, and every encounter with him makes them bleed again. Today I stood before the mirror, adjusting the navy dress shirt my mother loved, preparing for her 60th birthday party at the old house in the San Francisco suburbs. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the heaviness that came with the thought of seeing my father. As I drove my BMW X7 through tree-lined streets, the afternoon sunlight danced on the windshield. I turned on the radio to drown out the chaotic thoughts in my head. The 2-story wooden house appeared familiar, like an old painting. My mother, Margaret, stood at the door, her smile radiant as the sun. "Ethan, you're here," she exclaimed, hugging me tightly, her familiar lavender perfume warming my heart, soothing some of the wounds within. The party took place in the backyard with lanterns hanging softly and laughter blending with gentle jazz melodies. My mother at 60 still exuded elegance, her silver hair neatly pinned, her brown eyes sparkling with kindness. I looked at her silently, grateful that no matter how the world turned upside down, she was my anchor. But my father, as usual, stood in a corner of the garden, holding a glass of red wine, his cold gaze sweeping over the crowd. Dressed in a gray suit, he looked polished, but his smile always sent chills down my spine. I tried to avoid him, focusing on chatting with relatives, but I couldn't escape the feeling of his eyes tracking my every move. "Ethan," my father's voice boomed as I grabbed a slice of cake from the buffet. I turned to see him approaching, holding a glistening glass of red wine. "Have a drink with your old man, son. This one's special just for you." He emphasized special, his smirk unsettling me. I took the glass, my fingers tightening, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thanks, Dad," I said, glancing at my mother who was laughing with Aunt Susan nearby. I didn't want to worry her. I raised the glass, taking a sip. The wine was rich, slightly bitter, but nothing seemed off. My father nodded as if he'd completed a task. Minutes later, my head began to spin. Everything blurred, the laughter and chatter of guests echoing as if from a distant place. My heart pounded, my breathing heavy as if the air had been sucked out. "Mom," I whispered, stumbling toward her, but my legs gave way. I staggered, the glass falling onto the grass, shattering. When I woke, I was lying on the old bed in the upstairs guest room, my head throbbing, my body drained. My mother sat beside me, gripping my hand, her eyes red. "Ethan, are you okay?" God, I was so scared. Her voice trembled as if she'd just lived through a nightmare. "What happened?" I mumbled, piecing together fragments of memory. The glass of wine, my father smiled, the dizziness crashed back like a wave. My mother shook her head, stroking my hair like when I was a child. "You passed out in the garden. Your father said you drank too much, but I know you didn't." "You only had one glass, right?" I nodded, my throat dry. "One glass, just one from my father." I held her hand, feeling her fingers tremble. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but I was drowning in a sea of doubt. My mother stood walking to the window, looking out at the garden where I'd collapsed. "Ethan, I'm worried," she said, her voice fading as if afraid someone might hear. "What you went through, dizziness, shortness of breath, passing out. I've seen it before. It was just like my father." I froze, my heart racing. "Grandpa?" I asked, my voice hoarse. I'd only met him a few times, as a kid, a tall man with a hearty smile. But my mother said he died suddenly when she was young from a heart attack. She turned her eyes red, her hands clenched as if holding herself together. "Yes, my father. He collapsed like that after an evening of drinking with friends. He was healthy, Ethan, like you. No illness, no signs. But the next morning, he didn't wake up." Her voice shook, each word dragged from a buried pain. I stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Mom, I don't think it was a disease." I hesitated, unsure if I should voice the suspicion screaming in my head. But her eyes, both fearful and hopeful, urged me on. "I get regular checkups, you know that. Heart, blood, everything's normal. No genetic issues." My mother stared at me, her eyes widening as if realizing something horrific. "Then what do you think happened?" she whispered, barely audible. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing on a cliff's edge. "Mom, I think something was wrong with the wine Dad gave me." The words spilled out, and I saw my mother step back, her hand covering her mouth, her face pale. "Ethan, what are you saying? Robert is your father." Her voice was pained, but I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "I know I said trying to stay calm, but don't you see? He kept saying that wine was special. I drank it and I collapsed. You thought it was strange too, didn't you?" he said. "I drank too much, but you know the truth." My mother sank into a chair, her hands trembling as she clutched a cold teacup. She was silent, but I saw the battle within her, between her love for my father and her maternal instinct. "I don't want to believe it," she said, her voice breaking. "But yes, I found it odd. He insisted you were drunk, but I saw you. I knew you weren't." We sat there silent, like two lost travelers in a storm. I held her hand, squeezing tightly. "Mom, I'll find out what happened. I don't want to suspect Dad, but I need the truth." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Be careful, Ethan. If you're right, I won't let anyone hurt you." As I left the house, I felt both relieved and burdened. My mother believed me at least partly, but suspecting my father, even as a thought, was like a crack in our family's foundation. Back in Seattle, I felt like I was walking a tightrope, each step trembling. The suspicion about my father clung to me like a shadow, but I had no proof, just the wine, his cold smile, and a gut feeling I'd nearly died. I wanted to forget to believe it was all in my head, but every time I looked in the mirror, I saw my own eyes, those of a man who couldn't stand still. Thanksgiving arrived, bringing November's biting cold. My mother called, her voice gentle but hopeful. "Ethan, come for dinner just one evening." I wanted to refuse to avoid the house now shrouded in darkness, but I couldn't disappoint her. "I'll be there," I said, though my heart felt like lead. The old house appeared under the sunset light from the windows, glowing like small flames. I stepped inside, the smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie filling the air, but it didn't warm me. My mother hugged me, her smile radiant, but I saw worry in her eyes. My father sat at the head of the dining table holding a glass of red wine, his gray suit impeccably pressed. He looked at me, his smile sharp as a blade. "Ethan, you okay after that fall in the garden?" His voice was even, but I heard the mockery. I sat across from him, keeping my face neutral. "I'm fine, Dad. Thanks." But my hands clenched under the table nails digging into my palms. As the main course was served, my father stood raising his glass. "To family, to Thanksgiving," he said, his eyes locked on mine. He handed me a glass of red wine, its color shimmering under the candlelight like fresh blood. "Drink, Ethan. This one's special." The word special rang out, just like at my mother's birthday. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming. I wouldn't let it happen again. I took the glass, my fingers trembling slightly. My mother was in the kitchen fetching dessert, and my father watched me, his gaze challenging. In that moment, I knew I had to act. I pretended to drop my napkin, bending to pick it up, and in a split second I swapped my glass with his on the table. The move was lightning fast, unnoticed. I sat up, my heart racing, sweat beating on my forehead. My father raised his glass, took a large sip, then turned to talk to Uncle Paul. I gripped my glass, now his, but didn't drink. I waited, watching. 10 minutes, 20, nothing. I started to think I was paranoid. But about 45 minutes later, my father stopped mid-sentence. He clutched his chest, gasping. "Robert, what's wrong?" my mother cried, rushing to him. He staggered, his glass crashing to the floor, shattering. He grabbed his head, his face ashen, then collapsed. My mother's scream tore through the air. The dining room erupted in chaos. Aunt Susan calling for an ambulance. I stood, but not out of fear, out of a horrifying realization. Dizziness, shortness of breath, collapsed just like me at the birthday, just like my grandfather's my mother had described. "Call an ambulance." Now I shouted, but my eyes were glued to my father. He lay on the floor, his breathing faint, his eyes glazed, staring at me. In that moment I saw a flicker of panic in his gaze, as if he knew what he'd just drunk. The ambulance arrived and paramedics whisked him away. My mother sobbed, clutching my hand. "Ethan, what's happening? Why is this happening?" I hugged her, but my mind was reeling. If I hadn't swapped the glass, I'd be the one on the floor. The thought stabbed me like a knife. "Mom, I need to get a sample of the wine from that glass," I whispered. She looked at me horrified, but nodded. I knew she was thinking the same thing. When everyone left, I quietly collected the remaining wine from my father's glass, the one meant for me. I poured it into a small vial, tucking it into my pocket. That night, I didn't sleep. The image of my father, collapsing his panicked eyes, and the red wine haunted me. I was right. My father had tried to kill me, and now I'd prove it. The days after Thanksgiving, I lived like a fugitive, not from anyone else, but from my own thoughts. The image of my father, collapsing, the panic in his eyes, and the tiny vial of wine in my pocket, felt like a ticking bomb. Every night I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind, or if I'd truly narrowly escaped death at my father's hands. But I knew I couldn't stop. I needed the truth, even if it tore our family apart. I contacted a private lab in San Francisco, a discreet one recommended by tech industry friends. I didn't dare mail the wine sample, too risky. Instead, I drove there, the vial heavy in my pocket. The technician, a middle-aged woman with thick glasses, eyed me curiously as I handed her the vial. "I need to know if there's anything unusual," I said, keeping my voice steady. "As fast as possible." She nodded, asking no questions. 3 days, she said. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. I returned to my apartment, locking the door, drawing the curtains, as if afraid my father could appear any moment. My mother called, her voice frail. "Ethan, your father's doing better. The hospital says he had a shock, but they can't find the cause." "Do you know anything?" I heard the suspicion in her voice, but I didn't dare tell her. "I'm looking into it, Mom." "Don't worry," but I was the one dying of worry. On the third day, the phone rang. The technician, Mr. Caldwell. "We have results. You should come in." Her voice was cold, professional, but I sensed the gravity. I raced to the lab, my heart pounding. She handed me a report pointing to a bolded line. "Barbiturate, high concentration," she explained. "This dose could cause unconsciousness, even death, if untreated." I stood frozen, the paper trembling in my hand. Barbiturate. Not wine, not drunkenness, not illness. Someone had deliberately poisoned my glass, and I knew who. I looked at the technician, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Thank you. Don't tell anyone about this." She nodded, her eyes sympathetic. Driving back, I circled the city, my mind spiraling. My father, the man who raised me, whom I tried to please despite his coldness. Why, then it hit me. My $5 million. No wife, no kids. If I died, he was the legal heir. The truth punched me in the chest. He didn't just want to control me, he wanted me gone. I pulled over by the bay, watching waves crash against rocks. The cold wind blew, but I felt nothing but the burning anger inside. My father had tried to kill me not once, but twice. If I hadn't swapped the glass on Thanksgiving, I wouldn't be here. I clutched the report, resolved. I'd confront him, not for revenge, but to free my mother and myself. My father was discharged a week later, looking weaker, but his eyes still sharp as knives. My mother wanted me to visit, but I knew this wasn't a normal visit. I brought the report tucked in my pocket like a talisman. Entering the old house, I saw my mother in the kitchen brewing tea. "Ethan, you're here." She smiled, but I saw sadness in her eyes. "Your father's in the living room." I nodded, took a deep breath, and walked in. My father sat in an armchair holding a glass of wine, always wine. He looked at me, that familiar smirk creeping up. "Ethan, visiting your old man, good boy." His voice was light, but I sensed the exhaustion beneath. "I need to talk to you alone," I said, my voice firm. My mother was in the kitchen, out of earshot. He raised an eyebrow, gesturing for me to sit. I didn't. Instead, I pulled out the report, placing it on the table before him. "Barbiturate," I said, staring into his eyes. "In the wine you gave me on Thanksgiving. Enough to kill. Explain." His face hardened, but he quickly regained composure. "What are you talking about, Ethan? Poison? You've lost your mind." He laughed, but it was forced, unable to hide the panic in his eyes. "Don't lie," I said, my voice cold as stone. "I swapped the wine with yours. That's why you collapsed, not me. I have proof." The lab confirmed it. "If you don't tell the truth, I'm going to the police." Silence. Only the ticking clock and his heavy breathing. Then, like a collapsing wall, he slumped, hands covering his face. "Ethan, forgive me," he whispered, his voice breaking. I only meant to knock you out. I was going to forge your will, take your money. I owe so much, Ethan. I had no way out." I stood there watching the man who was once my father, now just a desperate shell. His confession cut into my heart like a knife, but strangely I didn't feel anger, only a deep, heavy sadness. "Why, Dad?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I'm your son." He didn't answer, just bowed his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. I thought of my mother, the years she lived with a man like him. I wanted to call the police to make him pay, but I knew it would destroy her. I won't go to the police, I said, my voice shaking, but stay away from me, and don't ever touch Mom. I turned, leaving him in the cold room. As I stepped out, I saw my mother at the door, her eyes red. She had heard everything. I hugged her, feeling her body tremble. "Ethan," she whispered, but said no more. I knew from that moment everything would change forever. But the story didn't end there. My mother, the woman I always saw as fragile before my father transformed, she stood tall, looking at me with a resolve I'd never seen. "Ethan, I heard it all," she said, her voice steadier. "What your father said. I can't believe it, but I need to tell you something." We went to the garden, sitting on the wooden bench where the birthday lantern still faintly glowed. She held my hand, taking a deep breath. "The symptoms you had at my birthday, dizziness, shortness of breath, collapse. They were exactly like my father's. He collapsed after drinking with Robert. Everyone said it was a heart attack, but I always found it strange. He was healthy, no illnesses. And after he died, Robert inherited nearly all my family's wealth. My blood ran cold. You suspect Dad was involved in Grandpa's death?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded, tears falling. "I didn't want to think it, Ethan. I loved your father. I wanted to believe in him. But now, I'm afraid I've lived with a monster." Her words were a cold wind blowing away any remaining illusions. I hugged her tightly, feeling her pain merge with mine. "Mom, if you're right, we need to find the truth," I said, my voice firm. "Not just for me, but for Grandpa and for you." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I'll help you, Ethan, no matter what. I want the truth." We sat there under the faint moonlight, mother and son, now allies in a battle neither expected. The next day, we began our quest for the truth. We spoke little, only acted like two soldiers in a silent war. I suggested starting with my father's safe in his study, where he kept important documents. My mother agreed, though I saw her tremble as she opened the room's door. "I haven't been in here in years," she said softly. "Robert didn't like me touching his things." The safe sat in a corner, a cold steel block. My mother remembered the code, their wedding date, a detail that pained my heart. Inside, we found real estate papers, contracts, and an old leather-bound notebook. "This is my father's diary," my mother whispered, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. My grandfather's handwritten words appeared, chronicling his final days. One entry stopped us cold. "Robert's acting strange. Last night, after a glass of wine, I felt dizzy, short of breath. I suspect he's trying to harm me. If something happens to me, investigate." My mother and I stared at each other, speechless. My grandfather's words, like a message from the past, confirmed our fears. "Mom, we need experts," I said. I contacted a private investigator, Mr. Harris, who'd helped a friend in a lawsuit. I also called Anna, a criminal lawyer. Both agreed to meet us. Harris suggested exhuming my grandfather's autopsy report. If there was poison, traces might still be detectable after all these years. With Anna's help, we obtained a court order. The exhumation was slow, but the results were a tidal wave. The autopsy revealed my grandfather was poisoned with a sedative similar to barbiturate, not a heart attack, not natural causes. We dug deeper. Harris uncovered forged documents in my father's inheritance records, signatures that didn't match irregular transfer agreements. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall of guilt around my father. My mother sat beside me, reading each document, her face hardening. "I lived with him for over 30 years, she said, her voice breaking. "I knew nothing, Ethan." I held her hand. "It's not your fault. He fooled us all." But I saw a fire in her eyes, not grief, but determination. She was no longer the submissive wife. She was a mother, a daughter seeking justice. My mother didn't hesitate. "I'll sue him," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Not just for you, but for my father. Robert must pay." I'd never seen her so strong. We prepared everything with Anna and Harris. The case file was thick lab reports on the wine, my grandfather's diary, the autopsy, and forged documents. Each page was a knife into my father's past. The trial took place on a gray, rainy day. I sat beside my mother, holding her hand, feeling her cold fingers. My father stood in the dock, no longer the powerful man I once knew. He looked old, his eyes sunken, but he still denied everything. "I did nothing," he said, his voice weak, but the evidence was undeniable. Anna presented every detail: the barbiturate-laced wine, the intent to kill me, my grandfather's diary, the autopsy and forged documents, proving my father poisoned my grandfather to seize the family fortune. The prosecutor called my mother to the stand. She stood tall, her voice clear, recounting years living with a manipulative husband and the pain of learning he'd killed her father. I watched her, my heart swelling with pride mixed with sorrow. My father had no chance. The jury took only 2 hours to deliver the verdict: guilty. Guilty of attempting to murder me and first-degree murder of my grandfather. He was sentenced to life without parole. As the police led him away, he turned to look at my mother and me, his eyes empty. I didn't feel victory, only a void where our family once stood. After the trial, my mother moved in with me in San Francisco. The old house was sold away to close the past. My mother found peace, free from my father's manipulation. She started gardening, tending lavender, and every afternoon we'd sit for tea, talking about simple things. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked one day as the sunset gilded the garden. She nodded, squeezing my hand. "I'm okay, Ethan. Justice has been served. My father can rest, and you're safe. That's all I need." I found peace too, though the scars from my father would never fully heal. I continued my work, but now I lived for my mother, for the simple moments we shared under the sunset. We'd overcome the darkness together. But this story isn't just about me or my mother. It's a warning for us all. Family isn't always a safe haven. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one sitting across from you at the dinner table. I once heard a story from Texas about a man named Jake swindled out of tens of thousands by his brother to pay gambling debts. Jake confronted him, but the betrayal left a lasting wound. Or Lisa from Ohio, who discovered her mother forged her signature to drain her savings for a house. These stories, like mine, remind us that trust is precious, but cannot be blind. I learned that instinct can save your life. On Thanksgiving, when I swapped the glass, I had no proof, only a feeling. But that feeling was the light guiding me through the dark. Studies like one from Stanford in 2021 show our intuition often picks up signals our conscious mind misses, like my father's smirk or the way he stressed special. My story is a reminder. Listen to that inner voice. If something feels off, don't ignore it. If someone's actions don't match their words, dig deeper. I also realized justice doesn't erase pain. When my father was convicted, I didn't feel triumph. I lost a father, though he was never truly one. My mother lost the husband she once loved. But we chose to face the truth, painful as it was, because truth is the only path to freedom. I think of others like Sarah in Florida, who discovered her stepfather stole her wages for drugs. She sued and won, but said she felt empty. Justice is necessary, but it doesn't fill the hole in your heart. My story stretched longer than I expected, but I want you to stay because there's one more thing to share. After the trial, I began helping others betrayed by family. I met Tom, a man in Chicago, whose sister tricked him into selling their inherited home without sharing the profits. I helped him find a lawyer, and through that, I realized my story isn't just pain, it's strength. I want you to think about your own life. Have you ever felt betrayed? A friend who only calls when they need money? A relative who sees your success as their opportunity? My story is an extreme version, but it stems from a universal truth. Not everyone deserves your trust. I keep going. Every day, my mother and I find joy in small things. A cup of tea, a blooming lavender, a quiet sunset. We've rebuilt our lives from ashes, and I want you to know you can too. If you're facing betrayal, be strong. Seek the truth. Protect yourself. And if you need a reminder, you're not alone. Think of me, Ethan Caldwell, who nearly lost everything but found light at the end of the road. I stood there under San Francisco's sunset, still holding my mother's hand, feeling her warmth as a reminder we'd survived the storm. But as I thought my story had closed, that justice was served, and we could start anew, another secret, deeper, darker, began to emerge like a venomous snake slithering from the shadows. My story wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dramatic and dangerous chapter. After my mother moved in with me, we tried to build a new life. Afternoons in the apartment's small garden, with her tending lavender and me brewing tea, seemed to bring peace. But one evening, while sorting old papers in my study, I found a yellowed envelope tucked among contracts from my startup days. It had no sender, only a scrawled note for Ethan. Open only when the time comes. My heart raced. The handwriting looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. I tore it open, revealing a short letter and a small black USB drive. The letter read, Ethan, if you're reading this, you likely know the truth about your father. But that's not all. Check the USB's data. Be careful. A friend I didn't have friends who wrote like this. Unease crept in as if I'd opened a door I shouldn't have. I plugged the USB into my laptop, my hands trembling. A folder appeared containing dozens of audio files and PDFs. The first file I opened was a recording, a hoarse, trembling voice, clearly an older man. Ethan, if you're hearing this, I'm probably gone. I'm Frank, an old friend of your grandfather. I know what Robert did. He didn't just kill Margaret's father. He had a network, Ethan. Others who helped cover his crimes. Trust no one, not even those closest to you. The recording cut off abruptly as if interrupted. I sat frozen, my breathing ragged. A net were others. My father wasn't a lone wolf driven by greed and desperation. The thought hit me like a punch. I'd always seen him as a solitary predator. But if he had accomplices, if this was a larger conspiracy, my mother and I weren't safe. I skimmed the PDFs, contracts, invoices, and encrypted emails from unknown addresses. One email chilled me, Robert. The kid needs to be dealt with before Christmas. No traces. Jay, who was Jay, and the kid was me. I didn't dare tell my mother right away. She'd endured enough pain, and I didn't want her living in fear again. but I knew I couldn't sit still. I contacted Harris, the private investigator who'd helped us with my father's case. I met him at a small cafe in the Mission where the noise of patrons drowned out our talk. I handed him the USB and explained the letter. Harris, a lean man with salt and pepper hair, frowned as he listened to the recording. "You're stepping into a dangerous swamp, Ethan," he said, his voice low. "If Robert had accomplices, they won't let you dig without fighting back. You need to protect yourself and your mother." Harris agreed to investigate, but warned it would take time and might lead to people more powerful than we imagined. While waiting, I started noticing small details around me. A black car parked near my apartment too long. Late-night calls with no one speaking when I answered. I began to feel like hunted prey. One night, driving home after meeting Harris, I noticed a gray SUV tailing me through 3 streets. I sped up, weaving through downtown alleys, my heart pounding. The SUV finally disappeared, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. Someone was watching me. I decided to tell my mother, unable to keep her in the dark forever. I chose a quiet afternoon in the garden. "Mom, I found something." I began, showing her the letter and explaining the USB. Her face paled, but she didn't grumble as I feared. Instead, she gripped my hand, her voice firm. "Ethan, if your father was part of something bigger, we have to find out, not just for you or me, but for everyone who might have been hurt." Her strength astonished me. I realized she was no longer the fragile woman living in my father's shadow. She was a warrior, and I was proud to stand by her. Harris called weeks later, his voice tense. "Ethan, I found something. Meet me at the parking lot near the Golden Gate Bridge, 9 p.m. tonight. Tell no one." I arrived early, standing in the dark, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. Harris appeared, handing me a stack of documents. "These are records of offshore transfers to a shell company in Nevada," he explained. "The company's linked to your father, but the real player is Jonathan Whitaker, a real estate broker with rumors of shady dealings, money laundering, extortion, even hiring hitmen." My blood ran cold. J from the email. Jonathan Whitaker. But the real shock came when Harris showed me a photo. It was Jonathan, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit. Beside him at a charity event was Aunt Susan, the aunt always at family gatherings whom my mother trusted like a sister. "Susan's involved," Harris said. "She received payments from Whitaker's company. I don't know her role yet, but be careful." I couldn't believe it. Aunt Susan, who baked me cookies as a kid, who hugged my mother when she cried, part of this conspiracy. The ground beneath me seemed to collapse. I returned home, my mind reeling. How could I tell my mother her sister, her last close family, might be a traitor? But I had no time to think. The next morning, when I opened the door to grab the newspaper, I found a small note slipped under the mat. One line: "Stop digging or your mother pays." My heart stopped. I rushed inside, checking on my mother. She was watering plants, oblivious. I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and called Harris immediately. "They know I'm investigating," I said, my voice shaking. Harris told me to stay calm, but agreed we needed to act fast. My mother and I moved to a temporary apartment in Oakland, using fake names to hide. I hired a private security firm to protect her, though it drained much of my savings. Meanwhile, Harris dug deeper into Jonathan Whitaker. He wasn't just a broker. He ran a sophisticated criminal network, from property manipulation to hiring assassins. My father, it turned out, was just a pawn in Whitaker's game. But why target me? Harris uncovered a shocking detail. My startup before I sold it developed encryption software that could crack Whitaker's security systems. Unknowingly, I'd become a threat to his empire. That's why they wanted me gone, not just for the $5 million, but because I was a danger. The next twist came when I got a call from Anna, our lawyer. "Ethan, I received a document from an anonymous source," she said. "It's an internal report from Whitaker's law firm showing your father didn't act alone in your grandfather's case. Susan mixed the wine for your grandfather that night." I nearly dropped the phone. Susan didn't just take money, she was in on it from the start. She helped my father poison my grandfather and was likely targeting my mother and me now. I knew I had to confront Susan, but I needed proof. Harris suggested a bold plan plant a listening device in her house. I hesitated. This was my aunt, once family. But after the threatening note, I had no choice. One night when Susan was away, Harris and I broke into her San Jose home. We placed a tiny microphone in the living room, hidden behind a family photo frame. One with me, my mother and Susan smiling brightly from a Tahoe vacation. The betrayal felt like a knife. Days later, the device recorded a conversation between Susan and a man Jonathan Whitaker's voice. "Robert failed," Susan said bitterly. "The kid's too smart. We need a new plan, Jonathan. Margaret can't survive if we want that money." Whitaker chuckled. "Don't worry, Susan. I have someone who'll make it look like an accident. A fire, perhaps." I listened, wanting to scream. They weren't just after me. They wanted my mother dead to seize the inheritance she held from my grandfather. I took the recording to Anna, who contacted the FBI. It turned out Whitaker was already on their radar for money laundering, but they lacked evidence to arrest him. My recording was the key. The FBI set up a sting, and I was asked to be the bait. They wanted me to meet Susan, pretending I wanted to reconcile to get her to confess on a wire. I agreed, though my heart pounded with fear. The meeting took place in a Palo Alto park under ancient oaks. I wore a wire with FBI agents hidden nearby. "Susan," I began, my voice trembling but steady. "I know you're involved with what Dad did. You helped him poison Grandpa, didn't you?" She scoffed, but I saw panic in her eyes. "You're crazy, Ethan. I'm your aunt. I'd never hurt family." I pressed harder. "Then why take money from Jonathan Whitaker? I have proof, Susan. So does the FBI." Her face paled, and in a moment of lost control, she screamed. "You think you're smarter than us? Robert was a fool, but Jonathan and I will finish this. Margaret will die, and so will you." That was all the FBI needed. Agents swarmed, cuffing Susan on the spot. She screamed, cursing me, but I just stood there feeling like I'd run a marathon. Susan was arrested, and days later the FBI raided Whitaker's office, arresting him and dozens of associates. His criminal network collapsed, and my mother was finally safe. But the story didn't end. During the investigation, the FBI uncovered one final detail, a twist I could hardly believe. My father from prison had tried contacting a hitman to finish killing me and my mother. He never gave up, even behind bars. I confronted him one last time through the prison glass. "Why, Dad?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I'm your son." He looked at me, his eyes empty. "Money, Ethan. Money always mattered more." His words were the final knife severing any remaining ties between us. I returned to my mother and we continued building our new life. She opened a small flower shop in San Francisco, selling the lavender she loved. I started working with organizations, supporting victims of family crimes, sharing my story to help them find strength. Each night I looked out at San Francisco Bay, the city lights twinkling like stars. I knew I'd lost a family but found a new one, my mother, and those I helped. My story is a warning, but also a flame of hope. Whatever betrayal you face, however thick the darkness, you have the strength to rise. Trust your instincts. Seek the truth. And remember, you're never alone. The days after Jonathan Whitaker's criminal network collapsed, I thought my mother and I could finally breathe. Susan was in jail. Whitaker faced multiple charges, and my father, though still scheming from prison, was no longer an immediate threat. But I was wrong. The darkness of this story didn't fade easily, and new secrets like undercurrents began to rise, pulling us into a more dangerous vortex than ever. Each time I thought I'd reached the bottom of the truth, a deeper layer opened, and I realized my story wasn't just about family. It was about a conspiracy spanning decades, involving people I never suspected. One morning, as I brewed coffee in our temporary Oakland apartment, my mother entered the kitchen with an odd expression. She held a small, intricately carved wooden box looking like an antique. "Ethan, I found this among the old things from the house," she said, her voice trembling. It was in a suitcase I thought belonged to my father. I set down my mug, curious. We opened the box, revealing a stack of old letters tied with faded red silk and a small rusted but sturdy iron key. The letters were handwritten in my grandfather's script, but what stunned me was the first letter's opening to Margaret. "If you're reading this, forgive your father for hiding so much." We sat at the kitchen table reading each letter. They revealed a secret my grandfather kept his whole life before his death. He wasn't just a successful real estate tycoon, but the head of a covert fund to protect sensitive documents, exposing corruption and crimes by powerful figures in San Francisco's corporations and politicians. He wrote that he tried to leave this group, but they wouldn't let him. "Robert was their spy, Margaret," he wrote. "He married you not for love, but for duty. He was planted in our family to watch me, and when I became a threat, he acted." The words hit me like a slap. My father wasn't just greedy, he was a pawn in a larger game controlled by forces beyond Whitaker. My mother sat there, hand over her mouth, tears streaming. "I lived with him for over 30 years. Ethan," she whispered. I thought it was love, but it was all a lie. I held her hand, trying to comfort her, but I was reeling too. What was the key? What did it open? And if my grandfather was right, if my father was part of a bigger organization, then arresting Whitaker and Susan might only be the tip of the iceberg. I took the key and letters to Harris, now my most trusted ally. He examined the key, frowning. "This looks like a bank safe deposit box key," he said. "If your grandfather hid important documents, they're likely in a vault somewhere." We began contacting San Francisco banks my grandfather worked with. After dozens of calls and visits, we found a safe deposit box at a Wells Fargo branch, registered under a shell company he'd used. The key fit perfectly. When the bank clerk opened the box, I held my breath. Inside was a thick stack of documents, a small hard drive, and a handwritten notebook. I took everything to the apartment, and opening the documents, I realized I held a bomb. They listed illegal transactions, recordings of secret meetings, and evidence of bribes to high-ranking California officials. Jonathan Whitaker's name appeared often, but another name kept recurring. Victor Langston, a billionaire tech mogul from Silicon Valley, known for lavish philanthropy and close political ties. According to my grandfather's notes, Langston was the mastermind of this organization, with Whitaker as one of his lieutenants. The shock left me barely able to think. Victor Langston was a familiar name. I'd met him at a tech conference years ago when my startup was active. He'd been friendly, even offered to invest, but I declined, sensing something off. Now I realized it wasn't coincidence. My encryption software, as Harris had noted, threatened Langston's systems, and he'd wanted me gone for years. My father, Susan Whitaker, all were puppets in his hands. I knew I couldn't confront Langston directly. He was too powerful with connections from Sacramento to D.C., but I couldn't sit still. I contacted Anna, who introduced me to Rachel Carter, an investigative journalist with a San Francisco paper known for exposing major scandals. I met her at a discreet Embarcadero bar, handing her the hard drive and document copies. "If this is true, Ethan," she said, her eyes gleaming, "we could topple an empire. But you and your mother will become targets. Are you ready?" I wasn't sure, but I nodded. I'd come too far to turn back. Rachel began her investigation, and meanwhile I received an anonymous text. "Return the documents or your mother won't see dawn." Attached was a photo of my mother watering plants in the garden, taken from an angle not covered by our security cameras. My heart stopped. I rushed home checking on her. She was safe, but I knew danger was closing in. I beefed up security, hired more guards, and convinced my mother to move temporarily to a safe house in Napa, arranged by a friend of Harris. But Langston didn't stop. One night, crossing the Bay Bridge, a truck cut me off, forcing me to the side. Two burly men stepped out, one holding a gun. "You think you're smart, Caldwell?" The armed one growled. "Hand over the documents, or I blow your head off here." I tried to stay calm, my mind racing for an escape. "I don't have them," I said, my voice shaking. "They're with the FBI." The other scoffed. "You're lying. Langston knows you have copies." I realized they wouldn't let me live regardless of what I gave. In a reckless moment, I floored the gas, swerving through a gap between them and the guardrail, nearly plunging into the bay. I escaped, but my heart felt like it would explode. I called Rachel, telling her everything. "Ethan, you need to go public with the documents now," she said. "It's the only way to protect you and your mother. If the world knows, Langston won't dare touch you." I agreed, though I knew it would make me a public target. Rachel worked tirelessly, and within a week her article hit the front page, "Silicon Valley Billionaire, Linked to Criminal Network Evidence from a Secret Safe." It exposed everything: Langston's role, the illegal transactions, and my father, Susan, and Whitaker's involvement. My mother's and my names were kept anonymous, but insiders knew I was behind it. The fallout was explosive. Langston's company stock crashed. Investors pulled out, and the FBI launched a federal investigation. Langston denied everything, but public pressure was immense. He was arrested at his Atherton mansion, the televised image of him in cuffs unforgettable. But I knew the game wasn't over. Men like Langston always had ways to retaliate, even from jail. Meanwhile, I uncovered one final secret, a twist that nearly shattered my faith in everything. Reviewing the safe's documents, I found another letter from my grandfather tucked inside the notebook's cover. It revealed he didn't just hide documents to protect the family, but to shield another person, a secret child he never acknowledged. That person, the letter said, was Claire Thompson, a woman living in Los Angeles. My grandfather wrote that Claire didn't know about him, but might hold another puzzle piece, a second hard drive with the encryption system Langston feared. I contacted Claire, a 40-year-old software engineer, through a cautious email. Meeting her at a Santa Monica cafe, I was stunned by her resemblance to my mother. Brown eyes, gentle smile. I told her everything from my father to Langston and showed her my grandfather's letter. Claire was shocked, but admitted she'd received an anonymous package years ago containing a hard drive she couldn't access. "I thought it was a mistake," she said, "but if you're right, it's connected." We took the drive to a cybersecurity expert who after hours unlocked it. It contained the source code for an advanced encryption system more powerful than anything I'd developed. My grandfather wasn't just a businessman, he was a tech genius secretly working to protect data from men like Langston. This code, in the wrong hands, could destabilize global financial systems. Claire and I decided to destroy it, but not before copying and giving a version to the FBI as a final shield against those still lurking. My story doesn't end neatly. Langston may be arrested, but his organization's roots remain in the shadows. Claire is now family, and she and my mother are the strongest women I know. We keep living, but vigilantly. Each night looking out at San Francisco Bay, I think of my grandfather, the secrets he carried, and the power of truth. I've learned trust is a gift, but it must be given wisely. And no matter how thick the darkness, there's always a light at the end if you're brave enough to find it. The city lights of San Francisco twinkled outside my window, but inside a new storm was brewing. Finding Claire, my half-sister, I never knew, and my grandfather's secret code seemed like the story's peak. I thought with Victor Langston arrested Susan and my father in jail, and the dangerous code destroyed my mother Claire, and I could live in peace. But I was wrong. My grandfather's secrets weren't just a legacy. They were a curse pulling me into a labyrinth of danger and betrayal, where each step could be my last. Weeks after Claire and I gave the code copy to the FBI, I received an anonymous email at midnight. The subject, "You're not done, Ethan." Inside was a short, grainy video, clearly from a security camera. It showed a hooded man outside my mother's San Francisco flower shop spray painting in red, "Return what's ours." My heart raced. I checked the shop's security footage. The images matched, and it happened hours earlier. What chilled me was a detail: the man wore a silver ring with an eagle emblem identical to one I'd seen on Mark Reynolds, a former colleague from my startup. Mark was someone I'd considered a friend. He was the lead engineer on our encryption software. Brilliant, but reserved, always keeping his distance. When I sold the company, he left without a word, and I thought he just wanted a fresh start. But seeing the ring in the video, I couldn't shake the feeling he was involved. I called Harris immediately, telling him everything. "Ethan, if you're right, Mark could be another link in Langston's network," Harris said. "But we need proof. Don't act rashly. I'll dig into him." While Harris investigated Mark, I got a call from Rachel Carter, the journalist who exposed Langston. "Ethan, I received a package from an anonymous source," she said, her voice tense. "It's about your startup. It seems your encryption software wasn't just accidentally threatening Langston, it was designed to do so." I was stunned. "What do you mean?" I asked. Rachel explained that per the documents, my grandfather secretly funded my startup through an anonymous investment fund. He'd planted Mark in my team to ensure the software could dismantle Langston's encryption systems. "Ethan, your grandfather wasn't just a victim," Rachel said. "He started a covert war and you're his heir." Rachel's words exploded in my mind. My grandfather wasn't just a businessman or tech genius. He was a fighter, and I unknowingly had carried on his battle. But if Mark was my grandfather's ally, why was he in the threatening video? I felt like I was playing chess with invisible pieces, each move potentially disastrous. I decided to meet Claire to share this, as she was now part of this story. We met at a small Los Angeles diner where she lived. When I told her about Mark and Rachel's documents, Claire frowned. "Ethan, I got something odd last week," she said, pulling another USB from her bag. "It was sent to my office, no sender. I haven't dared open it, but I feel it's tied to our grandfather." We took the USB to the same cybersecurity expert who'd helped before. After hours, he unlocked it, revealing audio files. My grandfather's voice recording secret talks with a man named Gabriel. In one clip, my grandfather said, "Gabriel, if I fail, Mark will carry on. He's the only one I trust to protect the code. But if he betrays us, Ethan is the last hope." Claire and I stared at each other speechless. Mark was my grandfather's chosen one, but what made him turn? And who was Gabriel? I returned to San Francisco, my mind a mess. Harris called soon after with shocking news. "Ethan." I tracked Mark. He said he's living in a coastal house in Monterey. But here's the kicker, he works for a company tied to Langston, even after Langston's arrest. And guess who's a major shareholder? Gabriel Voss, a prominent San Francisco lawyer. Gabriel, the name from my grandfather's recording. My stomach dropped. Gabriel Voss wasn't just a lawyer. He was one of California's most powerful figures, with deep ties to corporations and politicians. If he was behind Mark, I was facing a monster bigger than Langston. I decided to investigate Mark myself, despite Harris's objections. I drove to Monterey, finding the modern seaside house Harris mentioned with large glass windows facing the Pacific. I waited until night when Mark returned and knocked. When he opened the door, shock flashed across his face, but he quickly recovered. "Ethan, long time no see," he said, his tone forced. "I didn't beat around the bush, Mark. I know you work for Gabriel Voss. I know you spray-painted the thread at my mother's shop. Tell me the truth, or I'm giving everything to the FBI." Mark smirked, but I saw sweat on his brow. "You don't get it, Ethan," he said. "Your grandfather dragged me into this mess. He wanted me to protect the code, but when he died, Gabriel took over. He has power you can't imagine. I had no choice." I clenched my fists, staying calm. "Then why threaten my mother? She's innocent." Mark's eyes darkened. "You're wrong. Margaret knows more than she admits. Ask her about Project Aurora." Project Aurora, Mark's words were a knife. I left his house, my mind spinning. Back home, I confronted my mother, though my heart was heavy. "Mom, what's Project Aurora?" I asked, my voice shaking. She froze, the watering can crashing to the ground. She looked at me, my eyes full of pain and fear. After a long silence, she sighed, sinking onto the sofa. "Ethan, I didn't want you dragged into this," she said. Project Aurora was a secret initiative my father led before he died. It wasn't just about encryption, it was a system to expose global criminal organizations. I don't know the details, but I kept a piece of it, a data chip hidden in the flower shop. I couldn't believe it. My mother, whom I thought was a victim, held a secret that could change the world. We searched the flower shop, and in a lavender pot we found a small metal box containing a chip no bigger than a fingernail. I took it to the cybersecurity expert, who confirmed it held part of Aurora's system, enough to restart the project if combined with the code Claire and I destroyed. But what terrified me was the chip's self-destruct mechanism. If accessed incorrectly, it would signal an unknown recipient, likely Gabriel Voss or his allies. I knew I had to act fast. I contacted Rachel, who suggested publicizing the chip internationally to expose Project Aurora before Voss could seize it. But as we prepared, an explosion rocked Rachel's San Francisco office. She narrowly escaped, but her documents were incinerated. I received a text soon after. "Next time it's your mother." I knew Voss was tightening the noose. In desperation, I called Claire, who revealed one last detail from her USB, an address in Nevada where my grandfather hid a secret archive. My mother, Claire, and I decided to go, knowing it could be a trap. We arrived at a remote desert warehouse and found a hidden vault filled with servers and documents. But as we accessed the data, alarms blared. Armed men stormed in, led by Gabriel Voss himself. "You're impressive," Ethan Voss said, his voice smooth but icy. "But you can't win. Aurora is mine, and your family is just in the way." In that moment, I realized Mark had betrayed us, luring us into a trap. But I didn't give him the pain of a false marriage and finding herself through her lavender flowers. Claire, with her intellect and bravery, shared how she discovered her roots and chose justice. Daniel, once manipulated by Cross, told of his path to redemption, helping us expose Cross's network. As we finished, the crowd stood applauding, but I didn't feel victory. I felt hope. Hope that our story would inspire others struggling with betrayal to know they're not alone. We founded a nonprofit, Light from Darkness, to support victims of family crimes and expose secret organizations like Phoenix. I spend my time with the organization traveling the U.S. to share our story and help others find their voice. My mother runs her flower shop, but also teaches gardening classes for kids, passing on lessons of resilience through tiny blooms. Claire became a tech consultant for the FBI, using her skills to block illegal encryption systems. Daniel, with his finance expertise, helps our organization trace dark money from men like Cross. But Nathaniel Cross remains a phantom. The FBI never found him, and sometimes in quiet nights, I wonder if he's watching. I keep the old phone in a safe, be a reminder that the fight never truly ends. But I'm not afraid anymore. I've learned fear only has power if you let it control you. Each day I wake, brew coffee, and look out at San Francisco Bay where the city lights twinkle like stars. I think of my grandfather who started it all, and know that though he's gone, his spirit lives in us. My story isn't a Hollywood happy ending. The scars from my father, from near-death moments, will always remain. But I've found meaning in the pain. I live for my mother, Claire Daniel, and those our organization helps. I live to tell this story to remind you that trust is a precious gift, but it must be given wisely. If you are hearing my story, I want you to remember one thing. No matter what betrayal you face, no matter how thick the darkness, you have the strength to step into the light. Trust your instincts. Seek the truth, and rise as I did to write the next chapter of your own story.